There is no limit to what North Korea can achieve when it gives up its nuclear weapons and embraces commerce and engagement with the rest of the world that really wants to engage. Chairman Kim has before him an opportunity like no other to be remembered as the leader who ushered in a glorious new era of security and prosperity for his people. The menace of nuclear weapons will now be removed. In the meantime, the sanctions will remain in effect. We dream of a future where all Koreans can live together in harmony, where families are reunited and hopes are reborn, and where the light of peace chases away the darkness of war. This bright future is within our reach.
No doubt, June 12, 2018 is a day destined to be etched in the history books, no matter what happens from here. After 70 years of war and a state of constant alert on the Korean Peninsula and broken promises by a family of North Korean tyrants, and following 16 months of a complete reversal of America's longtime policy of strategic patience with the growing nuclear threat in North Korea, President Trump and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un hold the first meeting ever between the leaders of the two countries and sign an agreement to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. The agreement, a broad brush aspirational document with the details, the heavy lifting to follow. But we want to recount the events of that historic day with a man who's been on top of this story for a good long time, LibertyNation.com managing editor Mark Angelides, who joins us from the UK. And Mark, welcome. And I want to start by looking at this through the lens of self-interest. For the U.S., our self-interest seems obvious. We remove a nuclear threat to not just ourselves, but the Western world writ large. But it seems to me that whether this agreement succeeds or fails is based on what's in Kim's self-interest and what his vision is of the North Korean future. Now, no one expects a Jeffersonian democracy to break out in this longtime communist country, but the question is whether Kim intends to continue ruling over an isolated police state, a prison masquerading as a state with zero freedom, which would signal that this deal would likely not work out. Or does he envision a North Korean future like China with robust economic activity, if not freedom, while maintaining his political oppression, in which case this deal would totally make sense?
Hi, Tim. Yeah, it's very much a motivation question for Kim Jong-un. Clearly, he wants to move North Korea into a position more like China, especially now that Chinese President Xi Jinping has essentially made himself president for life. Because Kim, he has access to the internet, to media, etc. He knows what's happening in the world and likely wants a piece of that for him, for his country, and for his kids. But what he doesn't want is to end up like Libya's Colonel Gaddafi, who was also given a lot of assurances and promises, but eventually ended up humiliated, tortured, and executed. Now, Kim doesn't want to risk that. He wants to open the country up, but remain in a strong position of power, much like President Xi Jinping.
Now, you know, Mark, watching the TV coverage of this on Tuesday, the folks on MSNBC looked like they lost their best friend. I mean, their faces were contorted by misery as they watched an historic moment that they did everything in their power to minimize and even criticize, because the agreement didn't have any details, as though you could work out anything more than a framework in one day.
Yeah, they were not happy. I mean, there have been a few bright sparks out there who are admitting that this is what it actually is an historic event. But for much of them, it really exposes their true nature. I mean, they pretend to be the caring side of politics, the progressive side, but I don't know. I mean, in their souls, they just seem dark, vicious, and vindictive. I mean, they would rather condemn 20 plus million souls to what is essentially a miserable life if they could just edge their leftist utopian vision just a fraction closer. And the funny thing is, without realizing it, their version of utopia is actually a lot what North Korea looks like today. I mean, I think we'll be hugely surprised at how fast this moves, though. I mean, the political will is on both sides. Both sides have decided they can figure it out for themselves. So in terms of the one-day framework, I think actually we're just going to see a huge amount of speed and efficiency on this, which should likely enrage the usual suspects more and more. And I look forward to it.
We're joined from the UK by Mark Angelides, LibertyNation.com managing editor. And Mark, the critics are saying we shouldn't trust Kim because of previous North Korean promises that have been broken, which is an understandable position. But is it not in Korea's own interest to redirect the outlandish portion of their national budget they spend on their nuclear program to feeding their starving people and building a sustainable economy? Isn't that in their interest to do that?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, Kim wants a stronger economy. He is suffering with the sanctions that are in place at the moment, especially as China has been, I would not say brought to heel, but they have registered it as in their own best interest to go along with the international sanctions. And the reality is he sees the writing on the wall. I mean, dealing with former presidents that you've had, it was never likely to end well for him. I mean, there's the devastation in Iraq, Syria, Libya, almost all the North African nations where what was it called? The Arab Spring was encouraged along by supposedly moral world leaders, and it was pure disaster.
Much was made, of course, of this famous meeting between Trump and Kim, but is not all the things Trump did prior to this one-day summit, the sanctions, the moves with China, the provocative talk about Little Rocket Man, the rest of it in this reset button that Trump pushed on Korea as soon as he was elected, isn't that stuff that they did prior to the meeting actually key to this agreement more than the meeting itself?
You're absolutely right, Tim, very much so. I mean, in the same way that Reagan and Gorbachev, they had the 85 summit and the 86 summit in Reykjavik, the one that Reagan ended up walking out on, and then came back in the 87 Washington summit to basically achieve the end of the Cold War. Now, the backs and forths and the walkouts, that they're all a part of negotiating, and that's very similar to what's happened here. The insults, there was the cancelled meeting and whatnot. There's very similar essences to both the Reagan and Gorbachev summits and the Trump and Kim summits.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the political question we'll close on. Did Trump just assure his reelection, Mark, as the president of both peace and prosperity? And did the blue wave just crash against a seawall?
Well, I never really had much doubt about Trump in 2020. Not so much because of the man himself, but because the Democrats have refused to learn a single lesson about why they lost in 2016. Their support is plummeting now. They might win a couple of low-hanging seats in the midterms, but until they fundamentally restructure and rebrand, maybe even get some decent ideas, they're not a threat. And then coupled with this amazing success between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un, that really has made millions of people the world over sleep a little bit easier tonight. I see no way he can't win.
Thank you, Mark.
Very welcome.
Mark Angelides, LibertyNation.com managing editor.